He's been a central figure in the strained relationship between the U.S. and China. But now, Harry Wu is coming home.
The search is on in Gaza for an alleged bomber called the Engineer.
And a flight attendant confronts a horrifying memory in a hayfield in Georgia. Welcome to The World Today. I'm Judy Woodruff.
I'm Bernard Shaw. Chinese-American human rights activist Harry Wu is on a flight from China to San Francisco at this hour, and as a result, the United States is now considering some new options in its relationship with Beijing. Harry Wu was arrested 2 months ago while trying to sneak into China. Earlier today, a Chinese court convicted him of espionage and sentenced him to 15 years in prison. But a few hours later, China put him on an airplane back to the United States. CNN's Claire Shipman joins us now with reaction from Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where President Clinton is vacationing. Claire?
Bernie, good evening. The president's back on the golf course. The rain has cleared here a bit. Now, he hasn't reacted publicly to Wu's release, but aides say he's extremely pleased. And they also add that this move wasn't entirely unexpected, but they didn't think Wu would be sent home so quickly. The Chinese government expelled Harry Wu just hours after convicting the human rights activist of espionage and sentencing him to 15 years in prison. He's on his way to San Francisco to his very relieved wife.
As I know that the trial is not fair and open. So, but of course right now I'm happy he will come home soon.
U.S. officials are also delighted. In a statement, White House Press Secretary Mike McCurry said, "The action removes an obstacle to improving relations between the United States and China." More specifically, diplomats say it now opens the way for Mrs. Clinton to attend next month's UN conference on women in Beijing. Administration officials tell CNN she'll go, but there's been no announcement yet. If she attends, she'll still face criticism from human rights activists and others who think it will send the wrong signal about China's record on human rights. But many disagree.
If Hillary Clinton were to go, and I would hope that she could go, it would be because she's standing in solidarity with her sisters around the world, not because she is condoning the practices of the host country.
Both U.S. and Chinese officials have publicly denied Wu's release and Mrs. Clinton's attendance are linked, or that any deal was cut.
But there has been, to the best of my knowledge, no deal or anything the way that you describe it, no.
But behind the scenes, U.S. diplomats say Wu's detention was the biggest stumbling block to the First Lady's trip. Experts note, though, that the Chinese were clearly looking to the bigger picture as well.
I think they have a genuine desire to try and improve the currently frayed relationship they have with the U.S. And if a smooth trip by Hillary Clinton to Beijing were to help things out, they'd probably view that as positive. But I think they view that there are a lot more serious things in the relationship that need to be fixed, as well as a visit by the First Lady.
And indeed, with Wu's release, officials say that talks this weekend in Beijing between Chinese officials and U.S. Undersecretary of State Peter Tarnow are likely to be more productive. The U.S. would like to discuss a number of things, including nuclear testing and trade. The Chinese would no doubt like to get some sort of word that Mrs. Clinton will be coming. And among other things, they're also looking for a much-coveted Washington summit invitation for their president. Bernie?
Claire, can it be assumed that First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton will now go to Beijing, and that the announcement might come this weekend, a few days removed from this development today?
Indeed, I think we can certainly look for the announcement soon. Some officials are saying they'd like to wait until the talks between Tarnow and Chinese officials are over and put some distance between this. Behind the scenes, they're saying they expect that she will go, but yes, I'd look for the announcement to come in the next 3 or 4 days.
Thank you. Claire Shipman, live from Wyoming. And later this hour, we'll talk about United States-China relations with Undersecretary of State Tim Wirth, a member of that American delegation to the United Nations Women's Conference in Beijing. And checking our top story for you, Chinese-American human rights activist Harry Wu is expected to arrive back in the United States in San Francisco in a few hours. China expelled him earlier today, a few hours after a Chinese court convicted him of espionage and sentenced him to 15 years in prison. Wu was arrested 2 months ago while trying to sneak into China. His detention has been a major source of friction in U.S.-Chinese relations.
The Clinton administration says the release of Harry Wu removes an obstacle to improving U.S. relations with China. But Harry Wu was not the only issue separating the two countries. CNN's Andrea Koppel examines the overall state of U.S.-Chinese relations.
When China wants to get the world's attention, it explodes a nuclear weapon, as it did just last week. When it wants to rattle the Taiwanese, it conducts a series of missile tests off the island's coast, as it has all summer. And when it wants to dominate headlines in the United States, it arrests one U.S. citizen, expels 2 others, and charges all with spying. Coincidence, or examples of a coherent Chinese policy to shake up those governments with which it is not on good terms? In this case, the governments of Taiwan and the United States are at the top of the Chinese most wanted list. And this is why. Because China still considers the island of Taiwan to be a renegade province, any mention of international recognition for its president, Lee Teng-hui, is read as a precursor to recognition of an independent Taiwan, something no Chinese leader will ever allow. And so when President Lee was granted a visa to visit the U.S. last June, even though it was called a private visit, the Chinese made their displeasure known repeatedly.
There is a great deal of pessimism in Beijing about managing the U.S.-China relations. They feel that the United States will not do enough to reassure China about its fundamental sovereignty issues, and that therefore they will have to continue to use very strong actions to get attention of the American leadership.
Since the recent downturn in U.S.-China relations, senior representatives of both countries have met on one occasion, when U.S. Secretary of State Warren Christopher spoke with Chinese Foreign Minister Chen Qi-chen in Brunei. And while that visit didn't repair the damage of the Lee visit, analysts say it's a base on which the U.S. hopes to build during Undersecretary of State Peter Tarnoff's visit this week. And after it, there may be yet another visit by an especially well-connected U.S. delegate when First Lady Hillary Clinton would travel to Beijing for the 4th World Conference on Women. Andrea Koppel, CNN, Beijing.
Joining us now to discuss the conference and U.S.-Chinese relations in the wake of Harry Wu's release, U.S. Undersecretary of State for Global Affairs, Timothy Wirth. He will be the 2nd-ranking member of the U.S. delegation to the upcoming Women's Conference. Secretary Wirth, thank you for being with us.
Delighted to be here, and thank you for your good information on Harry Wu. You had it first.
CNN, our own Claire Shipman, who's out in Wyoming covering the president, is being told by White House officials there that Mrs. Clinton is going to Beijing. Can you confirm that for us?
That's a decision the White House makes, not the State Department. So if the White House is saying it, then I suppose it's true. We have not got any firm confirmation on that yet.
Does that mean that Harry Wu was the main obstacle to her going?
Well, it certainly clears the air. I think that both sides were very interested in clearing the air. We've seen sort of an abrupt slide in U.S.-China relations over the last 18 months or so. I think both sides have a major interest in trying to get us back on an even plane, and the Harry Wu release certainly helps, Judy.
Some people are going to say there's some sort of quid pro quo here. They wanted her to come, they wanted Mrs. Clinton to come, the Chinese did, and therefore they decided to let this fellow go back to the United States.
Well, they made very clear, the Chinese embassy here in Washington made very clear yesterday that there was no tie between the two, and criticized American journalists for making a tie between the two. So, you know, we would just take a signal from them and that they did not want to tie the two at all. We both, however, both sides, again, want to do a better job in our relationships.
Well, in fact, if Harry Wu is only one of a number of points of disagreement between the United States and China, and we just heard in Andrea Koppel's report, missile tests, nuclear weapons being tested, you know, this whole human rights record that China has, that being the case, let me turn the tables in this argument. How could Mrs. Clinton go?
Well, let's draw a parallel between, say, now and 1936. If you remember back to the Olympics in 1936, you know, you had a very difficult, repressive regime in Germany. Jesse Owens went and made an incredible statement, right? I mean, that was the forces of right, and the United States, by having Jesse Owens there, made a great statement. The United States, by being a very aggressive and progressive delegation and going to Beijing, will make a very strong statement on behalf of women, on behalf of human rights, on behalf of all the sort of enlightened positions that we would take. Mrs. Clinton believes these very strongly, is very committed to them, worked very hard on them, and you know, she will ultimately make that decision. But if she does go, it's a very clear statement of leadership and the U.S. commitment to these issues.
If she were to go, though, doesn't her very going ignore the plight of these hundreds of thousands of people who are in prison?
I mean, I think the fact of having such a strong U.S. delegation there, Mrs. Clinton's member becomes even stronger, but having a very strong U.S. delegation going to Beijing can't help but have a major impact on the progress of the whole document, on all of these issues, and the impact in China. I mean, having a conference like this and having it successful in China is certainly going to have an impact, short-term and long-term, on what goes on in China.
How specifically? I mean, do you expect that they're going to release more human rights?
Well, let me give you just two examples. One, the document itself. We will end up in the middle of September with a very strong document on women's rights, women's health, the education of girls, and a whole set of issues on this front. The Chinese government will certainly sign up to that document. Then, over a long period of time, citizens in China, the growing NGO networks in China, non-governmental organizations, citizen groups, will be able to hold their government accountable for what their government signed up to do. These things take time, but we help that internal process which we believe in. In the shorter term, there will be 5,000 or 6,000 Chinese women involved in this conference, and their engagement with women from the United States and Japan and Europe and Africa and all over the world, you know, can't help but be a beneficial influence. So all of these together, you move the ball a step at a time. There's no silver bullet that's going to solve all the problems in China. There's no silver bullet that's going to solve all the U.S.-Chinese relationships, but you make progress one step at a time, and we think that this is a good major step.
Let's talk about the conference more broadly and women all over the world. How are they going to be tangibly affected, helped by this conference?
Well, in the way of, this is the fourth conference. They're held about every 10 years. This one will be, I think, a major step forward on women's health issues, looking at the full cycle of women's health and recognizing the fact that women's health issues are very different, you know, from men's health issues and have to be worked on in a different way. I think we made great progress before at the Cairo conference on population and development. And I think the rights of women in the healthcare business are going to be advanced very significantly. Lots of attention on them, more countries focused on them, and coming to understand that they have to change their ways. Closing the gap between girls, the education of girls and boys. You know, a very important thing to do, more and more countries giving this attention and understanding that their own long-term development is in part key to making sure that girls are educated. So countries come to understand that. You make an impact over a long term. We in the United States, I think we have much to learn in terms of economics, micro-enterprise, a lot of experiments that have worked well elsewhere in the world we can do right here in our own backyard.
What do you say, Secretary Wirth, though, to these conservative critics who are out there arguing that this is just a big platform for extreme left-wing feminists to peddle their dogma, if you want to call it that, to the whole world, that it's just an exercise in something that shouldn't take place at all?
Well, some of them have said that. I think that's very insulting to a delegation that's very well balanced. It's got Republicans and Democrats on it, some highly visible members of the Catholic Church and the Muslim religion and so on in the United States. So we have a very broad delegation, and to suggest that the delegation is somehow radical in that way, I think would be an insult to Tom Kean, former Republican governor of New Jersey, who's a member of the delegation, or Mrs. Weld, the wife of the Republican governor of Massachusetts. It's a very good, solid American delegation. Now, there are those who are critical of empowering women. They don't want that to happen. They want to turn back the clock. Well, I mean, that's a position to take, but I think that's held by a very small minority in the United States of America. I think most people recognize, you know, the very great importance of women being more engaged economically and politically and in all kinds of roles in the United States of America. That's good for our future. That certainly is the position taken by this administration. And, you know, we're going to get, of course, criticism from some of these very conservative groups, but, you know, that comes with in the American political system. They have a right to say it, but we're going to go ahead and do what we think is the right thing.
All right, and you're off to China on Monday.
I am, and we'll see you there, I think.
That's right. We'll be there to cover it.
Good job. Thank you.
Undersecretary for Global Affairs, Tim Wirth, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
All right, Bernie.
Thank you. I look forward to your reporting.